Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Solar Dudes podcast. I am Cole Eaton.
And this is Bobby Burnett.
And we are the Dudes. Today on the Solar Dudes podcast, we are going to be talking about battery systems, battery setups, different types of battery technology. Bobby and I have been working together now for about 2 years, and Bobby gets a lot of customers that are looking for battery backup. You know, his full time is being a solar integrator. I have done some work with project management, as well as design and, you know, some other specialty applications, as well as doing some integration and sales myself. So Bobby has quite a few customers that are looking into batteries, and he knows enough to be dangerous, a little bit scary at times.
True.
And what he'll do is get the basic question answered. He'll get the light bulb on. He'll get them thinking about the batteries and what they should do. And then that's usually where I'll come in and say, okay, this is the parts and pieces that I'm going to recommend for you, customer, that are going to achieve the goals that you're looking for. So today, Bobby's been looking lately to get some batteries for his own house. And we're just going to have a candid conversation to see his recommendation and then also talk about some of the other options out there. Bobby, tell us what you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. First, Cole, I want to just back up and say thanks. I'm so glad you came along to work in the same place I did. I've learned a lot from you in a relatively short time. Cole's so resourceful. He makes fire by rubbing two ice cubes together. I am interested in batteries for my own house. I've got a 13 kW solar system on my roof now. I've had it for quite some time. I'm one of those that got lucky to get into solar at a time when I could offset more than my actual annual use. So some of my power is going to waste. It's literally just going right back to the utility company. I get a small amount of money back for that at the end of each year. Our purpose isn't to save money with these batteries. We're obviously in a situation where we're already offsetting every bit of our power. We're getting money back. There's not going to be any more savings for our particular situation that's going to come out of getting batteries. So a lot of folks that do call us want batteries for different reasons. Some of them are more, they have a real application they need the batteries for versus just trying to save money with them. There's different ways and different reasons, which you'll speak more to that. And that's why I'm here to ask you about all those things. But for us anyway, the batteries look like this. We got this power we're not using. The cost of batteries have come down. There are occasions when the power goes out. We do want to be, for lack of a better word, we want to be ready. We want to be prepared in a situation where if we want to stay home and work, if we are at home working, if the power goes out, we have 2 refrigerators full of food. If that happens, we don't want the food to go bad. We want the refrigerators to be backed up. We want to be able to keep charging our phones and using our computers, and maybe even buy a couple of mini splits, which are just small. Think of like what a space heater is, only rather than heating the space, it cools off the space. So a couple of small, affordable mini splits that'll air condition, say 400 square foot bedroom and a 400 square foot living room where we can watch TV. So we might have a couple outlets, a TV, a mini split, and a couple of refrigerators backed up.
And if we're talking the bell curve here, you are the majority. The people that come to us for battery backup, this is generally what they're looking for.
This is generally what we see on a regular basis. The full off-grid, I'll have you speak a little to that. That we get from time to time. The prepper community, it's very big in Arizona. We get those from time to time. But the majority of folks just want to have a situation where if the grid's down, they're still up. They're still able to do the things they want to do.
I'll get a lot of calls from guys like you. And those guys will say, hey, I want to take my whole house off grid. And I'll say, okay, do you already have a solar system? Yeah. Okay, and it offsets 100% of my power. Great. So you have the solar piece. We can offset 100% of your power. Now you want to go off grid. What's your reason for doing that?
Right.
Well, I want to stick it to the utility company. So you're telling me you're willing to spend $50,000 to $100,000 maybe to stick it to the utility company?
Well, maybe not so much.
Well, and I'll tell those guys, I'll say, listen, you're only sticking it to yourself here. right? You're not sticking it to them. They could care less that you just spent $50,000 or $100,000 to go buy this completely off-grid system, and you live in a downtown area where power goes out once a year, right? And once you kind of explain the financial side, people say, okay, well, off-grid doesn't make sense to me.
Right.
But there are cases where it does make sense.
There sure are, and there's some couples, a couple that called not too long ago, and they're buying a house, or I'm sorry, they bought a piece of land 5 miles away from the nearest, would it be a substation? What would it be called? The nearest connection point to the grid, let's say it that way.
It's called a utility line.
So the nearest connection point to the grid is 5 miles away. And they're looking at a cost of, I think what the utility company told them was it's going to be right around $50,000 to get a line run out to their property that they bought. So they're calling us and asking us, hey, what would it cost to just build this house off grid to start with? And I think you actually picked up the ball on that one. How's that going?
Yeah, so I met with them, and they are really building a modest home, and it's not in the valley, so it's not where we really get the high heat. It's actually up in the hills a little bit, so they get a more steady temperature. It may drop into the high 30s, low 40s in the wintertime during the nighttime. And in the summertime, it may hit 100 or 105, but they have a much more mild climate than we have down here in the valley. And it was only a 1,300 square foot cabin, so it was a full-time residence for them, but they were retiring and just wanted to live out in the woods. For a scenario like that, it made sense for them to do it. So we put together a package for them. I think it came out to $40,000, $50,000, about what they were going to pay the utility company to get the power run out there, where we were going to provide them power with solar, batteries, and then a backup generator to charge the batteries when they got really low. And that system achieved the same goal as running that utility line out there, except now we don't have any power bills.
I'm going to stop you here and there. I'm going to challenge a couple things. Even though I'm in the industry, I'm going to challenge on some of these. Not because I don't believe you, but because I want you to be candid with me and with the folks out there listening, because it can get real confusing real fast.
Challenge accepted.
So $50,000 for a system that'll run. The house was approximately how big?
I think it was like 1,400 square feet.
So it was a decent sized place. It wasn't tiny. It wasn't one of those little tiny houses.
No, but it definitely wasn't an efficient house either. It was like kind of log cabin style.
Yeah. So anyway, $50,000 for an off-grid system. That sounds like, okay, well, that's the solar, the batteries, the whole kit and caboodle. Why is it not realistic to have a $50,000 off-grid house? For example, my solar on my house, 13 kW, was right around $50,000. Now, this was a while back when the incentives were bigger coming from the local utility. The tax credits were the same, but the utility rebates were different. Point is, though, there was still it's a big system. Why doesn't a typical customer paying $50,000 for a system able to just take their house off grid if they're going to pay $50,000?
Well, they can. There's no reason that they can't. The reason that they don't is because there's no financial benefit to it.
I see.
And so people call us and say, oh, I want to go off grid. And, their reason wasn't to stick it to the utility company. It was just because they thought it was going to save them money. And then they come to find out, oh, it's not going to save me money. It's going to cost me an arm and a leg. And in some cases, may even cause me difficulty if I do run out of power. I do have a hiccup in my system. Now I'm down and I don't have anything backup to rely on.
So this couple's analysis was based more on, hey, I've got to fork out that $50,000 one way or the other. Might as well fork it out to someone I don't have to owe a bill to each month.
Exactly. Theirs was completely financial based. Now, don't get me wrong; they liked that they were doing solar and off grid, and it's cool. But their main motivator was saving money.
Okay. So there's going to be times, it sounds like, where saving money does work off grid, and then majority of the time, if it's utilities available, readily available, at the street level where the house is, it's probably not going to save you money.
At a high level, if we take a battery system and we make it to be a battery backup system, meaning it's backing up our house, like what you want to do at your home, Bobby, it's not something that you're looking at a payback. It's more like a pool. So I'm putting this in for that comfort factor, for the cool factor, for the ability to do what I want to do. And that's what I'm putting it in for. It's not going to save me a dime. Whereas if we're doing a battery system that's used for demand mitigation. So a couple episodes ago on our first podcast where we talked about how to save money on a demand rate, we talked a little bit about batteries. And we can use those batteries to pump out power during those demand hours to reduce our demand level. We can also do that to offset kilowatt hours when they're really high in cost. And we may or may not need a solar system to achieve both of those goals.
Okay, time out. Why would you not need a solar system for the batteries if, in a case of, what'd you call it, demand mitigation? Why would you not need the solar to charge the batteries?
So you charge the batteries when you get the cheap rates of power.
From the house itself.
From the utility company, right?
Okay.
So I'm actually using more kilowatt hours from the utility company, but at a really cheap rate so that I can store those kilowatt hours and then use them to push back or use internally in my house when the rates are high.
All right.
So basically I'm robbing Peter to pay Paul, but Paul costs me a heck of a lot more money than Peter does, so I don't mind doing that.
So it's basically a little storage box where you buy the cheap power, you just put it in there, and then when the power is expensive, you pull out the cheap power and you use that power instead.
You got it. And so those are some scenarios where it makes financial sense to include a battery-based system. One great example is Hawaii. Hawaii has what's called a no-grid cell option for their solar panels. So if you have a solar system, you're in Hawaii, a lot of people don't know, most of the entire islands are run off of diesel fuel. And because of that, the utility grid can't really accept power being pushed back onto it through solar panels and renewable energy sources. And so what they do is they make you use all of that power internally. Well, the power cost there is like 40 cents a kilowatt hour. It is crazy expensive. So it still does make financial sense to put in a battery system and use all of your solar power, wind power, whatever kind of power you got internally because the power cost is just so high.
Got it.
So back to your situation, Bobby, where we're looking at battery backup, maybe a safe room. We know there's other applications out there. Let's get back on track with what you're looking for. So again, you're looking for the backup. I think I know what you want. What kind of stuff are you wanting to run? You said maybe a couple rooms, couple lights. Are we talking air conditioning and heating here, or are we just talking the fridge, some lights, and a phone charger?
That's an easy question to answer because I want it all. But I started Googling. We were talking about that earlier and got overwhelmed pretty fast. Started with, Tesla, neat, nifty battery, hangs on the wall, piece of art, blah, blah, blah. Looked pretty cool. But, of course, that just dominoed into all kinds of other possible systems. Tesla does have competitors, and then that dominoed into trying to decipher what here is marketing fluff and what here is really data that's meaningful. For example, you hit a particular website of a big major name battery that everybody knows the name of, and it's like $3,500 for the battery. And it's like, okay, well, that there's got to be more to that cost. And what does that actually buy me? Okay, the battery's $3,500. What else do I need? And what's it going to do for me? Do I need 2 batteries? Do I need 10? I'm here because of that. What do I need? Let me answer your question. Let's pretend for a second I want to run my whole house in the event of a power outage. And I already have the solar in place, right? I want to run my whole house. Let's start there. It's not necessarily what I'll be happy with, but let's examine the reality of that. Let's pretend I want to run the whole house in a power out situation. Where would I start?
Well, how long do you want to run it for?
Let's say at least 24 hours.
24 hours. So you want to run it perpetually.
Oh, I see what you mean.
We're back to the off.
Let's assume the power is out for 24 straight hours and it comes back on.
Okay, so you need to be able to provide power to your house at full capacity for 24 hours. We need to look at the worst possible case scenario. So worst case scenario is what we have to build if that's what you truly want. And worst case scenario is going to be middle of summer. Air conditioners are running 15 hours of the 24-hour day, all 2 or 3 of them that you have at your house.
Right.
Water heater, well, it may already be at that level because it's 130 degrees outside. So let's
true.
say the water heater's probably not doing too much.
That's true.
But we're going to assume your pool pump's running, that you're home
heater?
during the day, you're running the stove, you're running the microwave, and you got 4 girls upstairs running the hairdryer. Your system just broke the $200,000 mark. Okay? It depends on how invested you want to be in this system. Is it something where you're going to manage power and say, hey, okay, we can go with a little bit smaller system and save a little bit money if we, use it how we need to in the house, meaning we only run a couple appliances at a time, or we don't include air conditioning and heating. There's a lot of things that you can choose on your end. How involved do you want to be? Do you want to have to go check it every hour and see what your power's level at and start shutting stuff off and shedding things that you don't absolutely need? Or do you just want it to run all in the background and you just, wipe your hands and you're good to go?
Right.
I don't have to touch it. I don't have to think about it. I use what I want when I want.
Right. Well, probably bringing it back to something realistic. Let's talk about what I will probably end up doing. What I'm thinking is the 2 refrigerators, a mini split, that small AC unit we talked about. Probably, put one maybe in the bedroom and one probably in the major living area. A couple outlets because I'm going to have to charge the cell phones and the laptop.
Run the TV.
Use
your
perhaps.
router. Sure.
So let's say that's the end in mind. Let's say that's the goal. Where'd that price tag just move from the full offset, off-grid situation to a situation where I can run that house for, let's say the power's out for 8 hours.
Okay.
On a summer day. And I know the ACs, the big 4-ton units aren't going to be running because that's just too much to ask of a reasonably cost system. Hence the mini splits. So where are we at now, with the battery system on that kind of scenario?
We just cut that whole thing by 80%. When we're designing these systems, that's where we really got to have a real conversation with you as the customer and say, listen, this is going to run you for 6 to 8 hours, and more than likely, we're going to talk about a typical day, okay? When we're talking backup, when we're talking these safe rooms like you're talking about, where you have 1 or 2 areas in the house that you basically have full power and heating and cooling, that is how comfortable do you want to be and how much money do you want to throw at this? We can make it for 6, 8 hours and then have extra on top of that, or we can just whittle it down to the cheapest price that we can get for you. When you're completely off grid or you're talking 24 hours, we got to have way more backup because there's unknowns in there that we can't think of.
Okay, Cole. So I do want to come back to something else that when I'm Googling the battery systems, what keeps showing up and popping up in the searches are generators. So I'm sure in their keyword searches, they've got batteries, and there's probably a good reason for that. They'd probably find themselves to be a real competitor with battery backup. How do I decide if a generator might be a better choice, say, than a battery backup system?
Well, first things first, I wish everybody would take their degrees from Google and go ahead and throw them in the trash because that is number one problem I run into is, hey, I read this. These are supposed to be. Okay, well, then what are you talking to me for? Why am I the expert sitting here and you're telling me what Google told you, right? Just ask me some questions and I'll give you those answers. So when it comes to generators, we have 2 different things to look at. So you already have a solar system, right, Bobby? You got panels up on your roof.
I got a 13 kilowatt system, correct.
So when we put in a battery system for you, we're going to tie that into the solar piece, and that solar is going to charge your batteries when you are out of power. So if it's a bright sunny day in the middle of spring and we have this battery backup system at your house, it may be that we designed it to run for 6 to 8 hours, but it can run for 16 hours because the batteries were being charged by the solar the entire time that the system was running, okay? The downside of a generator is that there is no renewable fuel source, right? So I can use a generator to offset my whole house or a part of the house, just exactly the same scenario that you talked about with the safe rooms and the fridges. The challenge is when it runs out of fuel, I'm out of fuel, and I either got to find a way to fill that fuel back up, which is going to cost me time and money, or I just got to be okay with it going down after a certain amount of time. So generators are great. I can run my whole house on a generator and for well less than the cost of a battery backup system. But I can't run it perpetually. It's not going to recharge itself. It's not going to last forever. I'm going to have maintenance on it. There's some drawbacks. Yes, they can achieve the same end goal, but there's different ways of getting there.
Okay, so if I'm hearing this correctly, and you stop me if I'm not, the generator will serve that purpose, but, and here's the big catch to that, is there's an ongoing cost to running a generator, which is the fuel.
Yeah.
So the accessibility to it, if, say, the reason the power is out in the first place perhaps is really bad weather and your generator isn't full, the generator's sitting there doing nothing for you. But let's say that the fuel source is accessible or that it is full of fuel. It's costing you the same amount of money to run that generator, perhaps as it would have, or maybe more, depending on the price of the fuel for it, than it would have just to run your house in the first place with regular electricity, where when you get into the solar charging the batteries, you've already got the solar, the sun comes up, and once you have those components, it perpetually recharges those batteries for no additional cost. It's just there every day, filling the tank back up, if you will. Proverbial, I'm picturing the batteries draining, and then they get filled up again the next day, and they drain, and they get filled up against the next day, filled up again the next day. Say if it's a several days of power outage, am I connecting the dots on that?
Yeah, you are. It's just like what we talked about for a whole house off grid earlier. If I could pay $50,000 to the utility company for connection to their grid, or I can pay $50,000 for an off grid system, well, it's the same $50,000, but I got a monthly payment with the other one.
Right.
Same thing with a generator. Okay, so I can achieve the same end goal, but what's it going to cost me to fill it up in fuel every time that I use it, or to buy a big propane tank that I got to bury in the yard, or whatever that fuel source is, natural gas. Well, maybe that's coming from the city. If it's truly a natural disaster, there's nothing to say that I have that natural gas either.
Okay, dude, cool. So sounds like it's not too complicated to calculate how many batteries I would need, or how much amp hours or kilowatt hours or whatever it is, whatever is going to come out of those batteries. Speaking of that, before I finish my question, I got a new question for you. Amp hours. Doing a little research on batteries here. I understand kilowatt hours real well. It took me 4 years, but I do. I understand it now. Amp hours, something different, or is it? How does amp hours relate to kilowatt hours?
Well, I won't quiz you on kilowatt hours here because I don't want you to, maybe misstep on your answer. But to your question about the batteries and amp hours, it's no different than kilowatt hours. All we're talking is different voltage, amperage, all these different terms, but kilowatt hours is our end result in any given scenario. So when we're talking kilowatt hours, it's volts, 120 volts for most houses, right, for an outlet, times amps. Let's say it's 10 amps. That's 1,200 watts of power. If I use that for 1 hour, it's 1.2 kilowatt hours, okay? Amp hours is just the amps that we're talking about on the battery side. So if I have a 200 amp hour battery and I have a 12 volt battery, so it's 200 amp hours, 12 volts, I multiply those together, I get 2,400 watts. That 2,400 watts, if used over an hour, is 2.4 kilowatt hours, right? So it's no different. It's just a kilowatt hour rating, but told in a different way. And the reason that they talk about amp hours is because of how batteries have been used in the past. And so one thing that another rating you'll see out there is cold cranking amps. Well, when we're converting DC to AC energy and we're using it in our house, we don't really care so much about cold cranking amps. What that is for the car world, right? For motors, when we need to start up a motor, when that car kicks on, we got to be able to crank so many amps in order to get that engine to turn over. So that's kind of where some of those ratings come from.
Okay, cool. While I was researching the batteries and different websites about batteries, and some of them were more marketing, and some of them were more like the data-driven, not really selling anything, just kind of teaching blogs and things like that.
Right. If you look at the top of the page and it says residential, commercial, industrial, that's probably a site that's trying to sell you something, right, not a site trying to give you information.
Right. And one of the things that kind of jumped out at me, we're just talking batteries now, not solar, is most of them talked in terms of amp hours, and then some of them talked in terms of kilowatt hours or kilowatts. Why would one battery or one company convey it one way and another convey it the other way? Any guess at that?
Yeah, there's a great guess. One understands marketing, the other doesn't understand marketing. So most everybody in the country knows what a kilowatt hour is, right? We see them on our bill every single day. No one knows what an amp hour is. So let's say I'm a battery company. If I'm selling to maybe a solar industry or a car manufacturer, well, amp hours is something that they're going to look at. When I'm selling to a homeowner, that homeowner is just going to be confused and dumbfounded looking at me with that question mark
like
look
I
on their
am.
Yeah, like you are right now. Because what they want to know is, what is the kilowatt hours? Kilowatt hours is something that resonates to them. So it's more industry jargon than anything else.
All right, one other question about amp hours, and I promise I'll move on from it, but it's still got me a little perplexed. And that is, kilowatt hour is a kilowatt hour. But with amp hours, at least when it comes to the capacity of the batteries, from what I've read, not all amp hours are created equal, meaning the battery could give you, say it's rated at 200 amp hours, or it could give you that, or it could give you far less. It could give you more, depending on how you use the battery. I mean, how many appliances or what kind of appliances you want for what length of time, or together at once or not together at once. Can you dispel that or maybe clarify that for me a little bit?
What you're referring to is the discharge rate. And so the
discharge rate?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the faster that you discharge a battery, the less total capacity it's going to have. We can make this a show about physics and spend 45 minutes on why that happens.
Let's not do that.
I don't think that we need to. But what it boils down to is batteries are rated, what that amp hour that you're talking about is usually on the 20 or 24-hour discharge rate. So if I were to take a 200 amp battery, a 200 amp hour battery, and discharge it over 24 hours, it's still that 200 amp hours, right? But if I drop that amp hour to 10 hours, it reduces that total capacity. So maybe that 200 amp hour is now only 160 amp hours, or, it depends on the battery type. There's a lot more to it than that. But the faster you use it, the less you have to use.
Okay, cool. So, dude, here's my next question is I plan on doing batteries this year. Now I understand a little bit better, okay, what's realistic, what's not realistic, given my goal set. What kind of batteries? I hit several sites, and there's some very sexy batteries out there that are very expensive, and then there's some that are not as sexy, but they're very affordable. And then I hit it was just a data site. It wasn't a sales site for sure. It was more like a wiki page. It was just a technical page. Just typed in types of batteries, and they got this wiki page, and it's just overwhelming how many different kinds of batteries. And we're talking backup batteries, not the alkaline batteries like the Duracell or Energizer that are on the shelf at Walmart. I'm talking backup batteries for home systems, and it was still a very overwhelming list. Where do I start there? How do I pick a battery?
Well, my first thought is if you're going to finance, we should probably run your credit first and see what your maximum budget is going to be.
Let's assume that it's at least 1 point over what your qualification requires.
Okay.
Let's just assume that. And move.
Fair enough. So the main types that we're going to see as far as backup goes, and as far as what I'm going to recommend to most of the customers that we deal with, are going to be a lead acid type of battery, which lead acid for us is going to be the kind we found in our car, right? The thing that's sitting under your hood. That's a lead acid battery or golf cart battery. They make many different versions of it. Flooded acid, meaning you got to fill it with water every so often. Sealed lead acid, which is a maintenance-free battery. So something you're not going to have to touch it. You're not going to have to do anything with it. It just kind of sits and does its thing. So those are lead acid. Then we have lithium type, which is the Tesla, which is Sony. They make plenty of different types of lithium batteries and different lithium technologies as well.
Kind of lifespan out of the least expensive battery, realistically. Here I'm living in a suburb of Phoenix. It's hot.
The ones that we're putting in your house, Bobby, I would expect them to last 5 to 7 years if you were to go with the lead acid option. Now, if you were in Hawaii and you were running these every day because you can't sell back to the grid and you have to use all the power internally. So there, they produce power, they store it, and they use it in their own house, okay? And here, you're going to be doing the same thing, but you're going to be doing it on a much, much less frequent basis. We're talking 2 or 3 times a year versus 2 or 3 times a day.
Let me see if I get this right. The sealed lead acid, which is the most economical, most widely used for this purpose, will do both. It'll do both. It'll do daily discharge, charge it up, use it up, charge it up, use it up, like you would in Hawaii, say. And it'll do sit there on the shelf for a long time, or are they two different kinds of sealed lead acids?
They're both sealed lead acid, but they are different types of sealed lead acid. There are different types. Some are made to sit and wait for you to need them. So they're going to store that charge at a high level over a long period of time, whereas other ones are meant to be discharged on a more regular basis. So it's still a lead acid battery. We're just going to pick the one that fits your application better.
Is there a name that differentiates the two, or is it just something you have to ask?
Not necessarily. It depends on where you're at, what you're doing with it, and how often you're going to cycle it.
Okay, though that's a really cost-effective battery. That's great, but I don't necessarily walk on the car lot and buy the cheapest battery. Walk me through why I would go with sealed lead acid, say, over whatever the next step up is.
You're driving a Yugo, so I'm thinking you probably are going with the sealed lead acid. But let's assume that you were going to go.
It gets me where I'm going, but getting into traffic in Phoenix can be tricky. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. So to your point, let's say we moved up to the next level. Let's say we moved up to a lithium type technology. Out of that, you're going to get more cycle counts. So you're going to have a longer lifespan out of that battery.
Right.
And you can also draw it down to a lower level. that's another discussion for another day. Unless you want to get into depth of discharge, I don't know that necessarily that's something
right
that
now,
means a
you
lot
know
to
what?
you.
Let's save that for another show.
Okay.
There's so much technical stuff, and you're right. I mean, when I got to that, there was a really cool website. I think I sent you the link to it, Battery University or something. But I was just inside of 15 minutes, very intrigued and very overwhelmed. There's just so much to learn about batteries.
That's a piece that, let your expert take care of that. That's not something that you need to necessarily understand.
Yeah,
we'll size it properly based on what we know about that technology. So back to your point, though. So the next level up as far as cost goes and longevity goes is going to be a lithium-type battery. The lithium-type battery, is going to get you maybe 10 years out of that battery, whereas that same lead acid used in the same profile, maybe 5 to 7 years. So you're going to get a longer lifespan out of that battery.
Okay.
With that, you're also going to get a higher cost. So they may be 2 or 3 times more expensive. They've come down a lot over the last couple of years, especially with Tesla out there saying lithium this, lithium that. Everybody, it's just kind of a buzzword now.
Right.
Everyone knows about it. Everyone's heard about it. Everyone knows how cheap it is. Just like you, Bobby, right? You were looking into them because they're $3,500. That's all you need. Boom, bada bing, bada boom. You're ready to go.
And what I didn't really quite connect the dots on, because I don't know how to decipher it quite yet, Tesla has done some pretty good advertising and some pretty good marketing, and you get on the website. And I don't know if I'm interpreting their website right either, but okay, $3,500 for X size battery. What would a comparable size battery be if we stepped back to the what was it again? The lead acid batteries.
So lead acid, you're probably going to save 30% on the total cost. It's going to do the same thing. You're going to get a couple extra years out of the lithium option. So there's a couple websites out there that I like to use when the financial piece really is big for somebody. I can show them the kilowatt hour that can be used out of that battery over the lifespan of that system.
Cool.
So you can kind of put in how often do I use it, what type of battery technology is it, and how long is it going to last me for based on my profile. And that gives you the cost per kilowatt hour used. And so it depends on how you're looking at this. Again, some people just say, okay, this lead acid, I don't feel safe with that in my house. Maybe it's going to put off some hydrogen gas, or I got to vent it, or do this, that, and the other. Whereas the lithium option, it's in a nice, cool-looking box with a big T on the front, and
right.
It's got some lights behind it, and I mean, they look great.
Well, and you bring up a good point. Sealed lead acid is safe also, right? Is there anything unsafe about? Well, shoot, you bring up a great point. Is there anything unsafe about keeping sealed lead acid batteries, or any battery for that matter? Maybe a better question, Cole, is there any batteries I shouldn't have inside of a garage?
When done properly, no matter what system we're talking about, is going to be safe. When we're talking a lithium battery, okay, take the Galaxy thing that you can't take on the airplanes now, right? They literally say on your ticket you can't bring, and I forget the exact phone model that can't go on there,
right.
But the batteries were blowing up. And so that's one of the things about lithium technology. You put a hole through that, it's going to catch on fire and burn everything down.
And most phones are sealed, are
lithium type technology. But if it's done properly, previous to that, were you not allowed to bring any phones on the plane?
No,
there was no restrictions. Okay, so if done properly, they're all safe. It's just a matter of picking the right one that's for you. So lead acid, same thing. Can we get hydrogen gas release from overcharging them? Yes, but if we never overcharge them, then we don't have this issue. So there's drawbacks to each, but if it's done properly, the drawback shouldn't really be a drawback for you as the customer.
Okay, got it. So that's just a matter of hiring somebody that knows what the heck they're doing in the first place.
Yeah, not every solar company is a battery company. Let me tell you that.
Yeah, no, I figured out real fast also. All right, so lithium. We talked about sealed lead acid. We talked about lithium. My father-in-law, my wife's dad, has a battery system. He's had it for years. He has a business up in Chino Valley. It's at his home. It's a separate building, but it's a business, and he makes deep sea. Well, he makes all different kinds of metal detectors, but none of them are really the kind you'd kind of beach comb with. They're more sophisticated metal detectors than that, and he's done that for quite a time. He's an engineer and retired and started that business up, and he's had a battery system for years for a couple reasons. He has above ground utilities on the side of a mountain where there's a lot of snow, and they're the last one to be gotten to if the power goes out. So for them, it's not that abnormal to be down for a couple, 3 days, 3, 4, 5, 6 times a year. it not only impacts his comfort at his house, but it impacts his business. So for him, the battery system made total sense. Here, for me, and that was an economic decision, by the way, for him. It stopped his business when his business wasn't running.
Yeah,
so
that hurts. You're going to fix that quick.
he fixed it quick. And he's had it for years, and he's thrilled with it. Mine's a little different approach. Mine is I'm not so concerned about running the business. I'm concerned about power's out at the house, and I got to choose between going to the hotel and staying there to have some comfort and charging my phone and not being in a 110-degree house or not. So I'm really kind of looking, but it doesn't happen very often. So I am looking for a balance there, the right budget to get this achieved. I've already got the solar piece. I've already got the battery charging in place, right? So sounds like right now today, because I'm not so concerned about a 10-year battery. I just want something that'll be the remedy for this. Still lead acid. What other battery technology should we be talking about?
We could talk for days on different types of battery technology. There's batteries filled with water. There's batteries out there that have an electrolyte fluid that flow through them. They're called a flow battery. And the actual electricity moves through a membrane. There's what's called an iron Edison, so an iron battery that'll actually last you 30 years. There's a ton of different types of batteries and technology to go along with it out there. Today, the only thing that I'm going to recommend that we have tried and true is going to be a lithium technology or lead acid. If you want to do something experimental or something that's a little unique, it's not that you can't. It's just that you're going to be one of the handful of the first that are doing it, right? And so if you want to be that guy, a lot of people want to be that guy. And if you do, then that's a great solution for you. We can, on another episode, we'll dive into all those different types out there. We'll talk about how they work and what the differences are and why an advantage over one or the other.
That would be good for another day, because I'm telling you, there had to be 12 to 15 different types of batteries with primary headings.
There's probably 12 to 15 different types of lithium technology.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That lithium was one type, and then under that were several subcategories of lithium. And I was like, okay, I need to talk to Cole because this is just too much.
Right? You start seeing words like nickel cadmium, lithium phosphate, iron oxide.
Oh, and by the way, what's a forklift battery?
A forklift battery is a sealed lead acid battery.
And why do they call it a forklift battery?
Because they stack a bunch of them together and make them really big, because a forklift uses a lot of power over the course of time. Otherwise, you'd be charging it every 15 minutes.
Okay.
So, Bobby,